And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you decided, man, I really want to go back there and get some more. You're brilliant. That was a fantastic move because we have a lot more for you. The reason we have so much for you is because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And you guessed it, you cracked the code. My guest today is a podcaster, amongst other things. Folks, I'm really excited to have this person on today. I have had the pleasure of talking to this gentleman before. This is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So let's get sailing and bring in our guest today, Catholic Life Coach for Men and host of the Catholic Life Coach for Men podcast. Please welcome Michael Jaquith, Dr. Michael Jaquith. Pardon me, sir, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I love this topic.
I'm glad to hear it. Is it okay if I call you Michael? Would you prefer if I call you
Absolutely.
Doctor?
Please, please. No, no,
Okay.
no, Michael.
All right, you got it. Michael, thanks again for coming on. You were on one of my other podcasts, had an absolute great time talking to you. I'm glad you're feeling better this time because, like I was kidding you about, you were just battling some kind of cold or flu or something, and you still came on and powered through, man. That was awesome.
No, we actually have six children. All eight of us, my wife included, got totally diagnosed with strep throat. It was just a
Wow.
mucus fest. It was so much. Praise the Lord for antibiotics. I'm going to say, like, just those things are wonderful.
That's great. That is great. Well, I appreciate you coming here today. And obviously, we're going to talk about your podcast and your coaching and everything else. Just give everybody a good idea of who you are. I mean, other than father of six, which is already an amazing achievement. But who is Dr. Michael Jaquith? What brings you here today? What are you about?
I think in a funny way, in order to answer that question, well, I need to go back a little bit earlier. So we'll try to do the quick version. I'm an unlikely candidate to be where I am now. So I was raised in a pretty lousy home. Parents divorced. Dad went to jail for 10 years. A lot of stuff went down. And I left with the biggest chip on my shoulder of the world. I went off to college and I'm like, I want a different path than what my parents were on. So I earned some degrees. I have a doctorate in chemistry from Cornell University. I put some work into that. And I go off and I work for the big corporate culture. And I was making lots of money and I was just loving it. We call it the golden handcuffs because it's so many benefits, but boy, you just can't leave. And at that moment, God called me to leave. And I was like, nope, nope, nope. Check the microphone. I think it's not working here, God. You cannot be sending that to me because I told you I'm not going back to, not having a nice job, a nice comfy income. And as always is the case, God then reaches over the two by four and whacks me upside the head, which is about the right method of communication I need. And he says, you need to leave. And so I said, okay, well, what am I going to do? And one of the things that I had discovered in my corporate journeys is that I really enjoyed talking with people about people. And I, at one point in time, had sort of started mentoring a number of different younger folks, mostly men, but not exclusively, in the corporate environment. So much that when I left corporate, a lot of them continued to come to me afterwards. And I said, cool. What do I do with that? Well, I'll go become a coach and a consultant. Okay. God seemed to bless that plan. And along the way, I said, well, what do I like to do? I like to talk. You may have figured this out about me already. And for those who don't know it yet, don't worry. It's for sure true. And so I started a podcast. And I honestly can say I don't know that I really knew what I was doing with my podcast at first, but that maybe sets the stage for who I am.
I absolutely love it. I love it. I forgot how just outwardly honest you are and just bold. I love that. I really do. So I appreciate you, being so open and honest about everything. I mean, PhD, chemistry, Cornell, the whole bit. You mentioned that God blessed the move and that you were sort of resistant to it. Um, your faith has always been a big part of you, or is it something that you came into later on? And kind of how did it come to that, to where you had that relationship with God that He could tell you to walk away from that kind of a job, and you would go, okay.
My faith was pretty hard earned. When I was raised as a kid, we were a pseudo Christian family, but like my dad just did some really bad stuff. I mentioned the 10 years in jail time, and I was left saying, I want nothing to do with that. And for the next, about dozen years or so, I worshiped what I call the Church of Hedonism. Turns out the Church of Hedonism doesn't actually pay out as well as the promises suggest it does. And about 2008, when I was nearing the end of graduate school, the hound of heaven finally caught up with me, and through great patience I never deserved, he's like, Michael, you want to keep trying it your way, or do you want to try it the way that actually works? And I was like, fine, 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 fine. So I joined the church. And I thought my problems were over. Turns out they weren't. And it turns out that all those terrible things that happened in my childhood had never really been resolved. And I brought all those into my marriage with me. That's actually, not a great plan, by the way. It's better to resolve those before you get married. But, I was a little slow in the uptake on some of this. So there I was. And that's when I say my faith became real. As I started realizing, golly, I didn't use the word golly, but we're speaking politely here. I am still just as messed up as my dad was. And as I slowly, bit by bit, painfully surrendered these pieces to the Lord and found healing, the Lord built credit with me. Not enough credit that I took him the first time he told me to leave the corporate world, mind you. Not that much credit. Like, we got to be reasonable here. But enough two by fours to the head. And eventually I said, okay, I'll do it. And I will say that when I left, it was pretty scary. Like, for those who go entrepreneurial, as many listeners probably know, if you're used to a steady paycheck and all of a sudden your paycheck doesn't, the steady and paycheck aren't in the same zip code, that it's really stressful. But God continued to bless it. Like, just one short story, just to maybe give an example. It was January. At the time, we owned a contracting business. We didn't have any business in the line. We had no money in our bank account. Rent was coming due. Didn't work at all. And God, out of nowhere, just lands this $6,000 sale, miracle sale. Boom, we got it just as we needed it. We had enough money. We kept going.
Oh, you
Oh
froze there
no,
for a
we've
minute.
disconnected.
Nope, I
We
can
break
still
up.
see you. Can you still see me?
Okay. All right.
All
Yes,
right.
sir. But
All
what
right.
sentence? Whereabouts did I start freezing?
You were telling us that God landed a good deal for you, and I think you said $6,000.
Oh,
That's about where you cut out. So go for it.
so it's January. It's contracting. There's nothing going on for this contracting business. God drops a $6,000 deal directly into our laps. That was
Nice.
exactly the amount we needed to cover it. So, like, this is like here's the deal with faith. Like, faith is the sort of thing, until you test it, you don't even know if you have it. But then as you do test it, and as God proves Himself faithful over and over again, eventually, like, okay, fine, fine, I'll trust you a little more. And that's kind of the story it's been for me, all this entrepreneurial journey.
Interesting. So you kind of came along kicking and screaming and almost begrudgingly into your faith that you have today.
Oh, very much so. I'm a stubborn son of a gun.
All right. All right. So I know this is a big part of your life, and for you and your family. Um, your wife was now she's self-employed also. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. So she's also an adult convert. She converted after we met. In fact, when we met, she had just joined a Protestant church that was the type that thought all Catholics were going straight to hell. And so it was a great initial start for the two of us. Thankfully, things did go on from there. And we obviously became married. And for a while, she was a stay-at-home mom. And she is like a level three entrepreneur, 3 out of 3, like, just it's in her blood. And so when God told us to leave and God said, go start business, she was like, yay. And so that's what we did. And so we both run businesses that are coaching businesses.
Nice. So was she already self-employed when you decided to become a self-employed self-entrepreneur?
So she had started at a much smaller level. There's this funny thing about small children. They seem to like lots of time and attention and have these funny things like needs and all that stuff, But it's just out of control with what their needs. But anyways, so what we did is once I left the corporate world, we had enough time that both of us then could go entrepreneurial. But before that, she was pretty full.
Nice. Okay. All right. So she's obviously been on board with this since moment one because that's in her blood, and you're the one who needed some convincing to kind of go off on your own.
Again, evidence A,
Yeah.
stubborn son of a gun. Yeah.
Got it. All right, I got you. So you go and you said you had the contracting business. Your journey through being self-employed, has it had a few different evolutions?
Just the two. Yeah, we did the contracting for a little while and then sold that off during COVID, another God blessing, and then launched this.
Got it. All right. And did you just call COVID a blessing?
No, no, no. This fact that I could sell a contracting business during COVID when
Ah,
nobody wanted to actually see people,
got it.
like there was a blessing to sell it.
Gotcha. All right. I was just kind of like waiting for that story. I'm like, okay. All right, I got you. All right, got you. So then you decide you're going to start a coaching business
Mhm.
for men, for Catholic men.
Right.
Okay. Now I know that you were sort of led to that, but how does that go with you starting that business from scratch? I'm curious.
Painfully, slowly. One of the things I did have is I had a couple contacts through the corporate world, and so that was helpful. Um, and beyond that, I just went out there and started starting my message out there. I think one of the things that when you start a podcast, you search for the perfect formula or the right format that's supposed to be the thing. And my experience was if I just go out there and put the real me out there with 100% vulnerability and integrity, like just this is my stuff. I'm on this path. Here's how I done screwed up. Don't do what I did. Here's what I learned about how I did. Like that is just such a different experience. And I would say at this point, probably about three-quarters of my coaching clients come through the podcast.
Nice. Okay. That's, of course, a question that I have coming up, which,
Mhm.
is you have the podcast. What made you start the podcast? How does it work with the business? What's the history on that?
Well, so I looked at the various forms of getting your voice out there. I can write, but I don't love writing because it takes too long. I like to listen. So I'm the sort of guy that like, I always like to be multitasking. So like I'm doing something with my hands outside, I've got a podcast going in my ears. Even when I'm driving, I got a podcast going on. I don't listen to, music as much. I listen to stuff. And so I thought to myself, well, I like that. I like podcasts and I'm good at talking. It turns out I do that really well. And it just kind of I don't do Instagram. I don't do all the social media stuff. Like I don't like that. And I want to love where I work. I want to love where I am. And so that's where I decided on podcasting.
Nice. Okay. And so the podcast is your main lead magnet marketing tool, so to speak, for your business.
We have a little bit of ads that we run, but that's the primary one. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so when someone finds out about your podcast, the Catholic Life Coach for Men podcast, and they tune into it, I know you have, several different types of topics that you cover on there. Give everybody an idea of what you cover on the podcast and what they can expect when they tune in.
So I'm an engineer by training, which means I'm super practical. And when I get into a topic, my goal with the topic is to really just give a man listening some cut to the bone, do this thing now to make a big change in your life from a Christian perspective, which means that I always let the Lord do the heavy lifting and all I do is put a few words together. And if I get those right, that's my part. You'll see really two different types of episodes I have, and they really actually have kind of diverged a little bit. I have interviews where my goal there is to really just get to know someone, to have a conversation. Like much like you, like I want to just have a conversation, talk to them. I don't script questions and see what I can draw out of them. And secretly, don't tell my potential clients this, but my goal is actually to almost coach them so that a potential listener might get a sense of what it's like to be with me.
Sure.
And the other type of interview I have, the other type of episode I have is an instructional one. So, for example, if you were of a Christian orientation, you've not gone in depth into the topic of humility. I did an part long series on humility that I am still getting positive feedback about because I I start with a litany of humility and just break it open piece by piece by piece, and then talk about from a faith perspective, how do you understand this piece? And as a man, how do I apply it to my life? Turns out there's lots of those when it comes to humility, lots and lots and lots of applications, and walk through those. That's why it took me 8 parts to get through all of it.
Let's say that's a lot of episodes on humility, but that's and when you got to make a point, you got to make a point.
I really think pride is the sin of our time. Like I mean this as including myself in this bucket. I look at our culture, I look at the American culture, and look at really the way that we make decisions. And even this is in the motto of Burger King: "Have it your way." Like that is what we expect. That's the baked in expectation as an American. Maybe other first world too, but I can at least say as an American, I expect it to be my way. I get mad when it's not my way, and yet the Bible's there and saying, "Who are you?" And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh, dang it."
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so a lot of your business comes through your podcast. These are, and that's another great question. Are they from people who come on the podcast, or are they listeners to the podcast? And how do you convert those folks?
Almost entirely listeners. I have a philosophy that every single episode has one very clear call to action. And I'll say at the beginning, I don't like commercials in the middle. Like I make my podcast the sort of podcast I want to listen to, which means I don't put any commercials in the middle of it all. Like the middle of it is just talking on the top of conversation. And the very end, I'll do about maybe 60 seconds ish or so of here's a program I'm offering right now. Check it out. Here's what you'd expect to get into it. And so I only ever do one per episode though.
Nice. Okay. And when you're doing those commercials, so to speak, is that your own stuff that you're, talking about?
Correct. Only ever my own stuff. I've not yet monetized it at all.
Okay, that was another question I had because you're at like 250 something episodes or something like that, aren't you?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you've been doing this for a minute. How long have you been working the podcast?
Oh, so it's about an average of one a week. So what is that now? Oh, about 4 years coming up on.
Yeah, nice. Okay. And you come out weekly with the podcast.
More or less, unless strep throat strikes.
And then all bets are off. I mean, we have six kids. That's, sort of huge. So, yeah, I understand. All right,
It
great. I am really curious about because you said you don't do the social media, you don't get into all that stuff. How do you promote the podcast so that it can bring you the clients?
So the biggest, I mean, first off, let me be just totally transparent. I'm struggling with that. Like that's actually where I think I need to grow more. Is I need to come up with more promotional styles. We've been branching into doing some Facebook ads. I think there are some men on Facebook, and I primarily appeal to men. A lot of my growth has just come organically with people referring. That's a common thing I'll say in the beginning episodes. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends.
Hmm.
If this episode's challenged you somehow, one of my philosophies is that men crave challenge in the same way that women crave praise. And that's a really important distinction to understand. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to challenge men because our culture doesn't like challenge. And my philosophy is I'm going to punch you in the face of your ego, if you will. And then if you're the sort of guy that hears that and says, "Oh, yeah, that does apply to me. I want to be better," then you're my listener. And then I'll ask you to find because then, but you also know other guys who are like that because we're all looking for guys like that.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Okay. So that's something that you're working on then because you don't do the socials. Is there a reason you stay off social media?
The short version is I don't like it. I don't know. Um,
That's fair.
I've really thought about it. Like I just don't want it on my phone. Like, so let me maybe tell you a short little story about me. When I was before I became a Christian, I was heavily addicted to pornography and I consumed it in bulk. And so to the point now where my brain is sensitive enough that the Walmart where I go to has the meat aisle opposite side of the store from the guns aisle. Those are my two favorite things. But right in the middle of those two is women's lingerie. And so when I want to go from one favorite department to the other favorite department, I don't go directly there. I go all the way up and around and then drop back down to the guns and I go through electronics because that's safer, barely. And to me, like so far, my experience with social media is it just feeds you whatever your weaknesses are. And I don't want to be fed
Mhm.
by weaknesses. I don't want to be fed by distractions. I kind of have a sense what they might be. And so I'm just stay away from that.
I mean, that's incredibly aware, incredibly self-aware of you to be working through that. And if the lingerie section is a problem, then yeah, I can see how social media would be an issue because yeah, you can't open it up and flip it 5 spots without, getting hit in the face with that. So, I mean, I totally understand that. It does put a little bit of a crimp in your marketing, plan, I think, by
It
not being able
does.
to do that.
It
So,
does.
right. Now, I know you've been on my show before, one of my other podcasts. You're here today, and I know that you're on Podmatch, and you've been on other shows. Is podcast guesting part of the promotional plan, and are you doing that?
Very much so. I probably at this point in time a guest, and I would guess at least 50 different podcasts. And I enjoy it. I love meeting different people, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well as all the people listening. You meet some interesting characters. Some of them resonate well, and some of them are interesting characters. And it's an adventure, it's a journey. And I really enjoy that. And so that is definitely a key part of it. I don't know that I could quantize how many of my listeners come from that,
Hmm.
but I certainly enjoy it.
Nice. I mean, it is a big marketing, push. It's a marketing tactic, so to speak. And so I'm glad to see you doing that too. Now when you're out there and you're doing that on this show, of course, we're talking about the podcast because it's Podcaster Nation, so it's what we do. But on, your average podcast, talking about whatever other topic you might be talking about, are you concentrating on promoting the business, or are you concentrating on promoting your podcast? Or both? And I'm just curious how that works in your mind with your own marketing.
That's a really good question. And I've gone back and forth on that topic a couple of times. And my current philosophy, and this is subject to change, is if I promote the type of work I do, and what I mean by that is as a guest or as a host, I try to ask questions and go into topics that are challenging, go into topics that people might not feel comfortable with. And my goal for doing that is a little bit to make people uncomfortable because I like that, but also a little bit just to give them a sense of like there's something real. Our society is desperate for things that are real. Just a slight aside. So I have 6 kids, and the oldest are really getting into singing. And so they're discovering this wealth of ancient hymns the church has that are stunningly beautiful. And they're just so majestic. And you just feel moved when you hear these old hymns that, like, I hope I don't offend anyone here by saying, but like Soaring on Eagle's Wings, it's a cute little song, but it doesn't have the depth to it that some of the other things do. And these kids are eating them up. I pulled out this 4-part hymnal at a camping trip a little while ago and flipped over into a Catholic song called Panis Angelicus. It's a Latin song. And all these kids go, yeah, we want to sing that. Yeah, we want to sing that. our culture doesn't have depth. We're all like 20 characters or 20 bits of a Twitter thing is the depth that we get into. Or look, here's the newest gadget that will solve you whatever woe you have. And so when I talk to someone, I want to go somewhere real. I want to get there fast. And my hope is, and this seems to be working at least, if I do that with a guest, if I put myself out there and say I'm willing to go there, then when I get men that come on, I give a free call to anyone, any man. And then most of the time I say that. I say, look, if what I'm saying resonates with you, just sign up for a free call. Like you can tell me I'm a crazy person, never talk to me again. I don't care. But I'm going to give you homework either way because I'm a jerk. But they come in and you'd be surprised that these men who have never told someone else secretly I'm addicted to pornography. I had an affair with my wife. She doesn't know about it. Whatever it is. I hate myself because I yell at my kids. I hear these things and men will share these things because they know I'm willing to get real. And I think men are desperate for that in a world of judgment. And if I add one more piece to that, I think there's this interesting within the Christian world specifically, there's occurring what I call reverse virtue signaling. And the reverse virtue signaling is to say something like, oh, the sin of lust, that's so bad. Man, I'm so glad I don't do that. Yeah, anyone who does that sin of lust, they're a terrible person. Oh, the sin of whatever, greed. Oh, that's so bad. I'm so glad I don't do that. Oh, I agree. That's really bad. We should all be really, really upset with the people who do that. I'm like, dude, brother, I'm a sinner. I may not have the particular one you're making fun of right now, but I got ones that look like it.
That's interesting. The reverse virtue. I would agree with you completely. I'm hearing people in my own head right now from things I've heard saying exactly those things. So I would say, yeah, you're probably spot on with that. Now, when you're doing your coaching with men, obviously it's faith-based. Are you teaching biblical principles? Is it faith-based in terms of your confidence and your backing? How does the faith actually play into the practice of the coaching?
So my initial training for life coaching was through the Life Coach School, which is not faith-based organization at all. And one of their primary tenets is you just reflect back to the client where they're at. And a lot of times for me, what I'll do is I start with that approach because most of us men, we have our defenses up. And if I just get the average Joe and I sit down and say, what you're doing is wrong. Here's a verse from the Bible that says you're wrong. They're not going to be receptive to that, right? And so instead I start by asking questions. And we'll ask questions until we get to a spot that they're afraid to look. And for example, let's pick on a parenting example. We'll use a different type. I, like my father, have a temper. And I don't like that. I don't like the looks in my children's eyes when I've yelled too hard and they're crushed. And you see that like as a dad, right? And there's a spot that I didn't want to look in my heart of, golly, what if I am more like my dad than I want to admit? Because I hated what my dad did. And so there's no way that I was going to let myself be like my dad. And then this problem was I was. And so when you reach that point with a man, you've got a couple options. Option number one is you run and hide. That's what most men do. Option number two is you gird your loins and go take a look at it on your own. Option number three is you gird your loins and do it smart and go in there with a buddy, which is the Lord. And that's when I think the faith really comes in, when we're at that spot of looking at that thing. And I use a couple different tools, but for example, one tool might be just imagine you're here in a room with that piece and you're having a conversation with that piece. What does it want to say? And now let's bring Jesus into this conversation. What does he say? And it is amazing. I've watched grown men, big manly men, like could deadlift 600 pounds, just break down crying as they hear the voice of the Lord address that piece themselves that they're so embarrassed and ashamed of.
Wow. Wow. That's a great way to bring those two worlds together. That
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds pretty powerful. Um, okay, so back to the podcast for just a minute because I'm intrigued. You're using it to build your business. You're not on socials. You are podcast guesting. Um, you're kind of then promoting when you go on and you podcast guest. You're promoting. It sounds like more the coaching business than the
Correct.
actual podcast. Okay, which is cool. Gotcha. Um, so in terms of promoting the podcast. Um, is it just word of mouth, pretty much then?
I think primarily that, and when I'm guesting other places, like obviously you were very generous. You read my podcast name and my business name both, and that was awesome. And most people do. And so like, I'd say my primary focuses right now are when I guest and then word of mouth. I'm blessed. I've got 100% 5.0 reviews right now. That helps a little bit. Um,
Sure.
and that, yeah, I mean, honestly, like this is something that I have to work on too. Like I would like to come up with, I've thought about running paid advertisements to it. Um, and I don't love that approach as much. That doesn't feel quite right.
Sure. That's a slippery slope when you start going down that too. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and please don't get me wrong. I'm asking for purely informational purposes.
Yeah.
So, um, as you talk about having done the podcast, I know you do interviews. Like you said, also in addition to your solo episodes. How do you determine who you bring on, and what's purpose are you looking for them to serve when they do come on?
One thing that changed my life doing interviews was when someone finally gave me permission to not publish a discussion I really didn't like. Because early on, I thought, oh no, I had a discussion. I have to publish it. And I had a few goofballs come on. And one goofball was this I advertised myself. This is a place that we talk about the Christian faith. And he was some sort of Eastern mystic and clearly just didn't pick up on the memo. And it was an awkward conversation. And I was like, that guy's episode didn't see the light of day. That's okay. And so I would say the bulk of my things come from Podmatch, which has been a phenomenal resource.
Yeah, for sure.
Or a lot of times I talk to people, what a John Maxwell's. John Maxwell's like my mentor from a distance. I love that man. There's so many great things he has taught me. But one of the things he says is you should always ask people, who do you know that I should know? And the best conversation with a discussion sometimes happens right after you hit the pause button or the stop button on the record. And I think it's really critical when you hit that stop button. That's the moment. Like there's this sort of created sense of intimacy between you and the other person. You've just shared with each other a certain amount, but now you've restored back into safety because the record button is off. Ask them, who do you know that I should know? Like, well, how else can I serve you? Like, just engage them as a person and see where we can go from that. Because the odds are, if they're podcasting, they probably know other people who are too. They've probably had other guests. And a lot of my guests, when people have said, you should check this guy out. Cool, I'll check him out.
Nice, nice. So grassroots networking, sort of at its finest.
People, well, John Maxwell line, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think when you look at it that way, like that's what makes the world work.
Love that. I love John Maxwell too. So I mean, I hear you loud and clear. Um, as you are putting this business together, how long have you been doing the men's coaching business then?
About 4 years. Yeah. I started the
4 years.
podcast day one. I knew I had too much to say not to start a podcast.
Gotcha. All right. Perfect. So they've been kind of going hand in hand, but that's great. As you're doing that, the as the podcast connects to it, do you find that the podcast gives you more credibility when you're dealing with people as opposed to maybe men's coaches who don't have podcasts?
I would say some. I would say there's definitely some credibility. What there is far more than credibility is just an amazing resource. It's very often that I'll have a discussion with a man and he'll struggle with something I did a podcast episode about. And I've got 250 out there. Odds are good I've done this, and I've tried to hit about every problem that I've had, which is probably all of them. And so it's pretty common. I'll say, "Oh, go check out episode 182 about this." You know, I've thought about creating a core set of podcast episodes, but I don't know how to get them enough attention. But I thought about doing that, like, because there's really about a dozen topics that most men will struggle with one of.
Okay.
And I've thought about doing that, but it's a great resource that way. It does give some credibility. Absolutely. Like when you say I've got this many episodes, it establishes you've been around for a while. Like when I'm looking for a service person, one of the first things I do is Google. Like who doesn't right now, right? And so if I Google myself, sounds a little prideful, but hey, I don't mind what I see. And I get in there and I'll Google myself. Like, okay, cool. So this is what a person Googling me will see. And it's meaningful to see that. It establishes that he's been doing it for a while. He's not just some upstart who decided to put on the coaching hat and ask for a dime.
That's great. Using the podcast as a piece of credibility as your marketing, piece is something that people really uh, don't take advantage of enough. As you're doing this, I know that you got started because you had contacts in business, and now you deal with both. It sounds like, do you somehow tap into business contacts to get a hold of groups, to get a hold of men that are there? Again, how do you go about finding your folks?
I have some, but I've honestly not had a lot of success that way with my particular business model. And
Okay.
here's why. Let's imagine that I have an amazing connection to Larry, making up his name.
Okay.
And Larry reveals to me some struggles he's having in his marriage, some struggles he's having, whatever his struggles are. And then Larry invites me to speak to the men's group. Well, Larry doesn't want to talk about those struggles in front of his buddies. He doesn't want them to know that he was clicking on the internet or that he was, spending too much money or he's up late, too late drinking or whatever his struggle is. And so it's been really kind of a barrier to find a group setting where the people know each other already and are willing to go that deep.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense in men's coaching. So do you do individual coaching as well, or is it all group coaching? How does that shake up?
At this moment, it's actually entirely individual. I've been attempting and playing with a couple different formats for group coaching. At the moment, I don't actually have a group coaching program going. Um, I haven't figured that out yet. This is, I think, one of the major struggles our society has got to figure out is in a digital age, how do we create opportunities to get people together more than one-on-one? We can do a great one-on-one. Like we know or maybe even two, maybe even three, but to get a big group together is really hard. We're all so busy and we're all so fractured and busy at different things. And so for example, I live in a very small town in northern Idaho. And one of the reasons we chose here is because it is a small town feel. And people do stuff together a lot. Every Monday night during summer, we all get together for volleyball. But that's unusual that an entire parish gets together. In our case, it's generally about 3 to 4 nights a week. I'll see people I know from the parish.
Hmm.
And that's not common. It's one of the reasons we moved here. But people
No.
struggle to get together as a group. It's really hard to say, could we do Monday at 7 p.m.? What time zone? Oh, yeah, 7 p.m. Mountain time zone. No, I'm free at Tuesday at 5. Like, it doesn't work. And so I don't know how to solve that yet.
I love that you're being so honest. You're like, nope, we're working on that. Nope, we're working on that. That's great. But you'll solve it. I'm sure you're going to solve all the stuff that I'm asking you about. And I appreciate you, like I said, just being open about, what you're working on. There's a lot of folks out there who are in the same spot. They're building businesses, they're actively doing them, and everybody's kind of struggling with the same stuff, unfortunately. And so, we all kind of look to each other for the answers to say, hey, what did that guy do? Did that work? Did that not work? Um, as far as building your business, as far as building your podcast, is there one thing in particular that you can say, hey, that did work pretty well. I was happy with that, the way that went down, and share that with folks?
I will put it to you this way. Every time that I have marginalized who I am, what I'm about, tried to be politically correct, tried to be gentle, tried to be something I'm not, I've felt like I've shrunk. And every time I've stood up strong and dared go to a space that seemed dangerous, not recklessly dangerous, but uncomfortably dangerous, that has paid out well for me.
Nice.
And I think that continues to be my best podcast episodes are the ones that I'm the most terrified to hit the upload button on. Because I just talked about how I struggle with this thing. I'm like, oh, okay. And those are the ones that tend to get people the most. And I think because that's the same thing that people want real. And so my invitation to you is be you. Don't try to be someone else. I was just watching a podcast the other day. He said once one of his secrets is he just asks the guest questions he wants to know because he's curious rather than trying to like formulate the perfect answers that are supposed to generate whatever. And so me being me tends to work out well because later on I'm still going to be me. And so if it's a bait and switch, they'll pick up on it.
That's great. No, I love that. I absolutely love that. Okay. All right. Good answer. Um, the you and I occupy a lot of the same space, in terms of subjects that we talk about, people that we deal with. Have you experienced any of that hate yet in terms of, talking about God on one hand and talking about men on the other?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. It's impossible not to. Ironically, the most amount of hatred I've encountered is with the Facebook ads, and you get a few people there that just go absolutely nutters. And Lord love them, I'm sure they're pursuing something believe is good. But I once heard someone say, art could never be great art unless it's hated by somebody. Mediocre art get a mediocre opinion by almost everyone, but to have something be truly amazing, somebody's going to not resonate with it. And when you're on that cutting edge, if it cuts you the wrong way, it cuts hard.
Nice. Nice. Great, great analogy. Also, and a very nice way to say, yeah, I've taken some hate and I'm still here.
I,
So,
I agree with Jordan Peterson. Never apologize if you haven't done something wrong. Those fake apologies, those are the end of it. Hey, look, if I screw up and I say something wrong, I'm gonna own it. I screw up with my little words, little ways all the time. But if I haven't done something wrong, if I've stuck to the core of what I believe, don't apologize.
good for you. Good for you. All right, let me interject my corny question that I like to kind of throw in here to everybody. In terms of doing your podcasting, the what is it about doing your podcast that you love the most? And what is it about doing your podcast that you just absolutely positively would love to throw out the window, dislike the most?
My favorite part, I'm gonna give you two because there's just two that are so different.
Go for it.
My favorite part is in the interviews when I have a guest that I ask the question to that they stumps them and they stop and they're like, "Oh, I've never thought about that, huh?" And from that moment, whatever comes next, I'm going to learn something and I'm going to enjoy it. And I've made a friend. That's awesome.
Nice.
I also really, really love when I can do a solo series that ties up like this. I'm temperamentally, I have a lot in me that likes to finish tasks. That's the engineering bit, right? And so that ability to like put together the final touching and have it go, yes. What do I hate the most? The tech. Oh man. The other day I was trying to publish an episode. I don't know what was going wrong with it. I uploaded it. It trimmed it down to 2 minutes from 50 minutes. Then I tried to re-upload it. File size already exists. So I tried to rename the file size, upload not allowed. Then I tried it one other way, upload limit exceeded. And I was like, oh my gosh, come on. And then I had to email their tech support. The tech support didn't get back until like, a day later, in which case I was now the podcast was late. All right. That's
Wow.
life.
That's definitely tech stuff. Okay. Yeah, I tell everybody if we were doing this Family Feud style and top five answers on the board, in terms of what people really dislike, tech, editing, promotion, all pretty much, top two or three answers on the board. So yeah, tech
Yep.
stuff for sure. I understand. I understand. Huge. All right. Um, I love that. Michael, as we kind of pull things together here a little bit, you've shared a ton. I really appreciate it. The and I love your answers to that question. That's why I keep asking that question because I get great answers to it. So thank you for that as well. Um, as we talk about podcasting and we're moving forward with all this, and I appreciate the fact that you don't promote. Do you ever see yourself um, going on social media, doing anything like that, doing anything different? What are you considering doing different in the future that you're sort of reluctantly walking into?
Okay, well, let's put my cards on the table here. These are some of Michael's crazy ideas about what's come down the pipeline. So I have 6 kids. The oldest is 14, and she's very, very responsible. I've thought about letting her, or potentially my oldest boy when he's about that same age, be like a limited exposure, like here's some posts, make choose stuff and make some posts about this stuff. I've thought about that. There's a friend of mine who does that with her older daughter, and the daughter loves the platform, is able to handle it. Like TikTok is right out as far as I'm concerned. No one should ever be on TikTok. But some of the other platform, I think we froze again. All right, back.
Yeah, you froze in
I'm
the
so
picture, but
sorry.
no, you froze in the picture, but not in speech. We heard everything you said. You're good to go.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
you're good.
perfect. So we'll
Yep.
keep going with TikTok. Absolutely nobody should be on TikTok. Like, I'm sorry, the Chinese government has released the algorithms. We know what they're trying to do. It is psychologically damaging to be on TikTok. So I won't touch that with a 10-foot clown pole. But outside of that, like I think there is some value in some of the different platforms. And if somebody enjoys it that I trust, that I can also use as a way to, sort of hide some money from the government in terms of tax evasion by paying the children, it's totally legal, of course, then that may also be an option to go there. Um, I've also thought more about, so one of the programs I launched just to try to get awareness spread was I put together a quiz that I call it the Manly Strength Assessment. And I ran Facebook ads to this quiz. And then what I do with it, the result of the quiz is whichever areas you ping badly in, it refers you to resources, one of which is the podcast. And so I've been trying to play with like ideas like that. What can I do just to get people interested and challenged and provoked enough to be curious about it?
Nice. Nice. Okay, great. And last question I have about the podcast itself is you said you hadn't monetized it yet. Are you against monetizing it for, a particular, moral type reason maybe? Or is it just you haven't gotten to it yet?
I certainly don't have a moral objection to it. As far as I'm concerned, as long as you're behaving ethically, money is money, and your job is to go out and try to fulfill
Sure.
God's call for you.
Sure.
That said, for me, on the one hand, I fear it would dilute my message because I do push my own stuff, and in the strictest sense, I haven't monetized it, but in the indirect sense, a lot of my business does come from that. A lot of my
Sure.
coaching business comes from that, and so I don't want to dilute that. But I think that the most core part is I want to make something that I want to consume. And I don't like it. Like I'm a cheapskate, so I don't want to pay for Jordan Peterson's premium subscription, which means I got my stupid phone there several times. Have you ever considered whether or not you should be trying Basin? Like, by that point in time, I'm now hitting that fast forward 30 seconds button. And if like certain commercials, you tap it 3 times, certain commercials tap it 2 times, and then you're through the commercial, you're back to the good stuff again, right? And I just don't like that, and so I don't want to be that guy. And if the good Lord sends me, tells me to go monetize with commercials, so be it. But outside of that, I don't see it as likely.
Okay. Gotcha. I appreciate that. I was just curious. So, yeah, it sounds like honestly, it's working for you. And so you're just, gonna keep figuring out how to make it work a little bit better and keep pushing forward. I love the idea of, using the kids. I think that's fantastic. Hey, you know what? I have two strapping, young men that are my sons, and I've used them to help me out with the business a million different times.
Absolutely.
So, you use what God gave you, and He gave you the kids. So it
One of the things I
works.
tell people when they said talk about I have six kids, I say, look, when you have your first baby, like that moment you get that first baby home and everything must be sterilized to like the nth degree, right?
Right.
And then you have your second baby, and okay, maybe it'll wipe down real quickly. The time you get to baby number five, you're like, don't worry, the dog licked that. I'm sure it's fine. And then you get to baby number six, you're like, wait, do we have baby number six? Where is baby? I don't know where baby number six is right now. I think one of the first couples holding them. We're good to go. And you get to this thing where it's just your life changes and children become part of the rhythm.
Yeah,
And I love the idea of including the children in the idea of business, teaching the business principles.
for
And
sure.
how does money flow? Stuff's expensive. Why is it expensive? Why is this more expensive than that? Those are really great skills.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. And then you can document all that and sell that as a course, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, why not? All right. That's perfect. Michael, I appreciate you coming on, talking about all this stuff. Let me ask you what is normally my final question. As with everything you've learned, you've been doing this for more than a minute. What is it about when you do your podcast and you're talking to other podcasters? What is the best piece of advice you can give out to another podcaster who's just simply not where you are yet?
Be bold and be authentic. Like there's so much noise. There's so much noise. If you just like type in how many podcasts are there in AI, you're gonna be shocked. If you want to cut through that noise, it's not going to be another of the same thing. You've got to do something that's bold, like not crazy or reckless, but bold, that's willing to be risky. That's actually about you. Look, every one of us, God made each and every one of us unique in some way. Like there's some things about me that I'm a one in a million. Some things about you too. Lean into those. It's okay if it's a little scary.
Nice. Great advice. Great advice, brother. Okay. Well, I tell you what, Michael, I appreciate you coming on. I really do. I wish you all the best with your coaching program. CatholicLifeCoachForMen.com is your website. Yes. That's
Yes,
where
sir.
people should go. Okay. Perfect. Beautiful. And then are all of the other things there, freebies and things like that? That's all with the website.
Everything's there. Yep.
Okay. Perfect.
Yes, sir.
And then, of
I'm an
course,
engineer. I don't know how to come up with fancy names.
I love it. And then, of course, Catholic Life Coach for Men, the podcast. Everybody go check that out. It's wonderful. I've listened to it. It's an excellent, excellent show. Uh, Michael, I really appreciate it. Dr. Michael Jaquith here for us, folks, giving us some great information. And I just really appreciate you coming on my show. Looking forward to having you on my additional show real soon. And really and truly, you're always a pleasure to talk to. And I appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much, I enjoyed it as well. You also are a gift.
Thank you. Thank you. Folks, that's another episode of The Podcaster Nation. The reason that we get these awesome folks on here talking about their podcast is because this is the podcast that's about podcasters. It's for podcasters and it's done by podcasters. And as we showed again today, this is truly the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So keep sailing.